Meme Ranch.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Meme Ranch podcast. And today I have a very special guest here on the show with me. His name is Neama Rahmani. He is president of West Coast Trial Lawyers in California. And he just scored an amazing victory, a mixed ruling in the Tony Saxon versus Kanye West case. And he's here to talk all about how this case unfolded, how it got to where it was at, what the jury trial was like, and what Ye was like on the stand. So thank you so much, Nima, for joining me here today. Let's just kind of start off the bat. Who is your client, Tony Saxon, and how did he find himself in this position?
Kalen, so happy to be here talking about this case. And, I'll start really from the beginning. And we have sued Kanye West, now known as Ye, a number of times. I think that was probably one of the issues in the case and why it went to trial. I think his team was maybe fed up with us. But, we're we're a pretty large law firm here in Los Angeles. And just by being here and, you and I do a lot of TV together and different types of interviews. Sometimes I'm talking about politics, sometimes I'm talking about true crime, sometimes I'm talking about entertainment cases because of the nature of where we live. So we had represented some of the teachers and one of the principals in the Donda Academy. That was the school that Ye founded in Simi Valley here in California. And there were some allegations that, because of Ye's vision, he had, removed the windows, and there was he wanted to take out the electrical, and the kids were sitting on the floor and had to eat sushi. And when the teachers complained, they were fired. So we got that case. It obviously got some press. We ended up settling it. As a result of that case, Tony Saxon found us, and I'll tell you a little bit about Tony. Separate case, but there were some of the same allegations. Ye bought a house in 2021, $57 million mansion in Malibu. And they called it the Ando House because it was designed by a famous Japanese architect. And Ye hired our guy, Tony, who is an unlicensed handyman. You don't need a license to be a handyman, but he's not a contractor, to really gut this house. And when I say gut it, I'm talking about off the grid, no electrical, no plumbing, no sewage, no water, nothing. So Tony
If I could
lived.
just interject, this was a big deal in the media at the time. This was like causing a storm. People were wondering what the heck Kanye was doing, and all you kind of saw were some of these photos that were being posted of the house here and there, where it was kind of a artsy. It was like an art project essentially, right?
It really was, and it was an interesting time. And then I'll just call him Kanye because he was Kanye then. It was an interesting time in Kanye's life because he was still with Kim Kardashian, but Bianca Censori, she was the architect on this house, and she was sort of there to really fulfill Kanye's vision, right? Off the grid, people called it like a bomb shelter or a bunker. And she was transitioned off, and Tony was brought on to do this. So this was done without any permits whatsoever. City of Malibu, there's the Coastal Commission here. It would have taken years to get the permits. Ye wanted it done right away, so he hired our guy to demo everything. Talking about kitchens, bathrooms, bedrooms, all gone. It was going to be completely self-sustaining. And one of the issues that came up, as everything started to be removed over a period of weeks, was there was no electricity. So they were running generators outside the house, three massive generators, gas powered generators. And one of the neighbors complained because these generators were very noisy. Because none of this was permitted, Kanye wanted to move the generators inside. And when our client, Tony, complained, he was fired. And that was the basis of the lawsuit.
And it seemed to me that there was this agreement that was made that Ye was going to give Tony allegedly around $20,000 a week. But what actually took place, from what I read, was that there was initially, I guess, just he received a $20,000 payment. I'm not sure when along the track he received that, and then somewhere around $100,000 for costs and fees associated with it. But the original part of the agreement, do I have that right? That he was supposed to be paid $20,000 a week, but he only got one $20,000 payment, right?
So The agreement was that Tony was gonna be paid 20,000 a week. He was gonna manage this project, and then he was gonna bring on, plumbers, electricians, other people to get them done. And Ye would pay Tony, who would pay out these people. Sometimes they'd be paid in Zelle, sometimes they would be paid cash or checks. But Tony was kind of managing this project, living there. So there were a few payments. There was a 20,000, a 100,000, and then another 120,000. So 240,000 total. And one of the questions in the case was Tony paid what he was owed? And we said he was underpaid um, by about 60,000. The defense said no, he's been paid everything he's owed. And ultimately, the jurors actually sided with the defense there. They ruled that Tony wasn't owed anything in terms of outstanding lost wages.
Mhm. And before we get into some of the backtracking of, what were some of the challenges that took place when you're suing such a high-profile celebrity, I just want to ask this additional point: is there anything, what can you describe for our audience what exactly sort of is a mixed verdict, and the mixed verdict that went in favor of your client? What were you asking for, and why is this still a significant victory given the fact that there's going to be attorney's fees involved now?
Yeah, this is a win. It's not a huge win, certainly not a home run, but a win. And the reason I say it's a win is because no one's ever pushed Jay all the way to trial, and you know they really tried to intimidate us and our clients. If you go look at some of the statements they put out in the press, just bashing our guy, not just in the courtroom, but outside the courtroom as well. They called him a liar, a fraud, a malinger, perjurer. They said that my firm, were engaged in some sort of conspiracy, and they threatened to report us to the district attorney's office and the state bar. Again, none of that had any merit. So it was really important for us to stand our ground, not be bullied by Ye's team, and push the case forward. So there were some wins and there were some losses, and I'll break them down. One of the key wins, one of the most important issues, was the fact that Tony was an employee. And like most states, there's a huge distinction between the rights you have as an employee and what you have as an independent contractor. So certain rights that were at issue in this case, the claims would be gone. If the jurors found that Tony Saxon was an independent contractor, our case would be over. Done deal. None of the claims we made would have survived. So the fact that the jurors found that he was an employee was a really big deal and very important to us. And I can kind of get into the reasons why in a bit. The second win that we got was the fact that Tony was injured on the job. So he was demoing everything. He ended up trying to take down this chimney. And when he did, he really hurt his neck and he got treatment. So they ended up awarding him $140,000 in past and future medical bills and some pain and suffering. And because Kanye didn't have any work comp insurance at the time, he was responsible for that. So normally, if you have an employee, you have workers' compensation insurance, they take care of it. But because there was no workers' compensation insurance, our client wasn't able to take advantage of that. And the third win was because this was a violation of the California Labor Code. We get our attorney fees and costs, and it's going to be expensive. I think when it's all said and done, EA is going to owe a judgment of over $1 million. So California is very employee friendly. So whenever there is a violation of the labor code and there is a win, the losing side, the defense, has to pay for those attorney fees and costs. Now, the defense did score some wins, so I want to be very transparent with everyone who's watching. Certainly not a home run by any stretch. And I'll tell you the three wins that the defense scored. First, the jurors found that even though our client complained about the generators and even though he was fired, the firing, the complaint was not a substantial motivating factor or even a contributing factor to the firing. So that's just basically my lawyer way of saying, even though Tony was terminated, the termination wasn't wrongful. It wasn't based on the complaint. So that was one defense win. The second defense win is what we talked about, the wage and hour claims. The jurors found that even though Tony worked as an employee, even though he worked many hours of overtime, that he had been paid everything he was owed. So that was a defense win. And then we had asked for punitive damages as well. Uh, the jurors did not find that Kanye engaged in conduct that was fraudulent or malicious, and therefore they did not award punitive damages. That's why I say it's a mixed verdict. So 3 wins for us, 3 wins for the defense. Frankly, I think the case probably should have settled. Uh, I still think it should have settled. That's what I said to the judge and to the opposing attorney on the first day of trial. But they really did dig in their heels, and I think they took this case personally for some reason, even though it's just another case.
When you're talking about that idea of maybe taking the case personally, what were some of the challenging aspects? And you've gotten through a couple of them, but some of the more direct, challenging parts of this case, bringing it against a high-profile defendant like Ye, and especially given that there was that countersuit that was filed against Saxon just earlier, I believe, this year. Uh, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the suit that they filed and sort of where things stand. So Ye went through several lawyers. He was unrepresented for a while. This was during some of his anti-Semitic comments. So I think I'm just speculating, some of the lawyers that were representing him did not want to continue doing so. So it was a hard case to move forward. When he got his current set of lawyers, one thing that we had done because of the work that was done in the house, we had put a lien on the house. And at that time, Kanye had separated from Kim and he wanted to sell the house. So they had to deal with the issue of the lien. Now, when we put the lien on the house, the lien can, account for certain items of damages, the work that was done. But there are other claims that we were making that the lien would not pay for. So, for instance, the injury claims, the emotional distress of the termination, even though the jurors didn't find that. So, the way to enforce the lien is to actually foreclose on the property. We didn't foreclose on the property. We pursued the civil lawsuit. And ultimately, they got a bond and the lien was discharged. So they ended up suing very shortly before trial. They sued and they served our client and our firm for essentially, without getting too legal, that we had caused the value of the property to decline because of our lien and our lawsuit. Now, obviously, we think that that's protected activity. It's part of the uh, litigation privilege. Any statements we made are protected by free speech. So we're going to be filing what's called an anti-slap motion. I think like the case will be dismissed, but it was certainly part of the play. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. So since we're going to go to trial and it was clear the case wasn't going to resolve, they decided to sue us and our client to try to get leverage. But again, we aren't scared. I'm happy to try another case against Ye in court and have him testify. I have no problem doing so. And I think the real big problem for the defense, and I'm happy to say it, when Ye came on the stand, part of the defense argument is because of everything that we did, Ye had to sell the house for a significant loss. I believe he bought it for 57 million and sold it for 31 million. And they're saying that our action. But Ye came on the stand and he said that Tony didn't destroy the house. I mean, it was clear that the reason they took such a huge loss is because the house had been completely gutted, right? There's nothing in there. So whoever decided to live in the house is not going to be like Ye. It's not going to be like Kanye West. They're going to want bathrooms, right? They're going to want a kitchen. They're going to want a pool and a jacuzzi. So a lot of work still needs to be done on the house, and I think that's the reason they had to sell it at a significant loss.
So my perception of that comment is basically Ye saying they did a pretty good job on my art project.
It did. I mean, ultimately, it was really what he wanted. So it's a shame that he wasn't able to live there and see it to fruition.
I'm kind of curious to learn a little bit more about the testimony since none of that was on camera, obviously. We could talk a little bit maybe first about some of Ye's testimony. It was described in the media as being a bit sleepy, and maybe perceived that way by jurors. I'm wondering, if that is a proper characterization, or if there's a better adjective or something that you might describe it as. And then, secondly, what was the significance of his wife Bianca's testimony?
So I'll start with Ye, and he did show up, and he did appear very disinterested. At some points, even seeming to fall asleep, which I think the jurors sort of caught that. Again, I don't get the sense that this was something that was very important to him. Maybe he wanted to send a message to us, our firm. And obviously, he's been sued by other people as well that, hey, I'm not going to settle these cases. I'm willing to litigate and go all the way. And again, could be about this case and the litigation over the course of years related to the house that he really sort of took offense to, or it could be just this new yay that is not going to settle these cases anymore and is going to push it the entire way. But at least when he was in court, our team did not think that he appeared interested in being there at all. A lot of I don't knows, a lot of I don't remembers. Um, Again, it's difficult to get testimony out of Ye, and I think it was one of the reasons the jurors returned the verdict that they did. Now, turning to Bianca, before I forget, Bianca testified the day before. She was more involved because she's the one who actually was referred to our client Tony and brought him on. So the fact that she was an architect and involved more with some of the other people who were working on the house, her testimony was probably more um, germane to the issues in the trial. I'd say Ye was sort of the creative, and Bianca was the one who was executing. And because she was on the ground, literally with our client more, I think, and communicating directly with our client a lot as well, I think her testimony was important in the case. And frankly, I think the jurors liked her, and I think that was some of the feedback that at least the reporters who covered the case got.
It must have been a little bit surreal. I mean, you're an attorney guy. You usually stay away from side comments and things like that, but it must be a little bit surreal to have maybe elicited some of the most open sort of comments from Bianca, given the fact that she seems like she's such a silent figure in Ye's universe. I mean, most of the time she's kind of just standing along his side, not really saying much. I mean, she's done obviously had some events happening in the past several months, some of her own sort of promotional materials, modeling, and different sort of global events that have had ticketed access and things like that. I even saw like a weird furniture kind of thing that she was doing where it was like models that were bending and posing in ways that were basically creating human furniture. Uh, Again, more art stuff. But what was that? I guess a little bit, from a celebrity kind of perspective, a little bit interesting to see her speaking, and usually, given the fact that she's not speaking.
Yeah, I mean, no question. And I've represented celebrities. I've sued even more celebrities. And I will say this. I mean, setting aside sort of very offensive things that Ye has done and, Bianca Censori's choice of clothing, what I can say is, at least as far as this case was concerned, and we took depositions in our office, both Ye and Bianca were nothing but polite, professional. There were no issues with them at trial. I certainly wanted to represent my client zealously and aggressively, but there was nothing in this case that was inappropriate or unprofessional at all on the part of either Ye or Bianca. Bianca, I mean, Ye is obviously one of the greatest musicians of this generation. Again, setting aside all of his admitted mental health issues and then what he's done that has been very sort of erratic outside of the courtroom in our office in this case. But he was, well, by all accounts, easy to deal with. Bianca was certainly very smart. Here's someone who's a master's. I think she was a good witness. She was eloquent on the stand. She was well prepped by her lawyers. So you're right. It was probably the most that anyone has heard from Bianca, at least someone that's not in their inner circle. She testified for the entire day on both direct and cross examination. So it was a full day of testimony for her. And again, I think she did come across as someone who was very well spoken, educated, and it was a very different side, I think, of Bianca Censori that maybe some people hadn't seen.
What was the activity like outside of the trial, outside of the courtroom? A lot of these celebrity cases usually turn out a little bit of a spectacle. I'm wondering if it was more of a turnout or less of a turnout than you were expecting, and if there were any interesting, if you could tell if there was some kind of like fan alignment that was happening, or if there were people there maybe who were less than fans, or even the opposite of fans that were just kind of wanting to see everything go down inside the courtroom.
You know, there was certainly a lot of press and media in the courtroom. It was not televised. We didn't ask for it to be televised, but there were members of the media there every single day, most of the major media outlets. It also happened that the big social media trial that is happening. Actually, the jurors are deliberating now. I don't know when this is going to air, but at the same time, what's happening in the courtroom. So there was a lot of press covering that case. They would come back and forth within the courtrooms. Obviously, the days Bianca and Ye testified were really sort of packed days in terms of the courtroom. There were some fans that were there that would come on occasion, but really, Ye and Bianca did not show up to trial except the days that they testified. So uh, certainly the testimony was interesting, but not, I would say, as interesting because they weren't physically present in the courtroom the vast majority of the days.
How were you able to sort of rebut some of the things that the defense put forth that were trying to maybe discredit your client? I recall there was a post by one of these social media bloggers. I saw of a video of Saxon having a sort of like a band performance or an open mic, and I had heard, I don't know if this actually was introduced in court, but I'd be interested to hear if you can confirm that there was a video that was played of this band performance of Saxon, and it seemed like the attempt or the play there was they were trying to sort of cast doubt on his injuries or something to that effect. Was that a clip that got shown to the jurors?
It did, and it was. So the allegation was that he didn't seek immediate medical attention. Well, I mean, we rebutted that by saying, look, here's someone that really didn't know that he could go to a specialist. He was self-medicating and taking pain meds. This all sort of came out at trial through a psychiatrist, and then after we retained our firm, and he was informed there are doctors that can treat you. He did seek that treatment. So you know our guy Tony, he is a musician and he is a showman, so he was performing, and the defense really took this video where he was sort of leaned back and doing sit-ups, saying that this shows that he wasn't really injured. Fortunately, we were able to call as a witness one of his band members who testified that no, I mean, here's someone that was in significant pain. He was taking meds. After he performed, he had a very difficult time getting up and even walking around. So, we had these other percipient witnesses that really had no interest in the case uh, that came to testify on Tony's behalf. And I think that was important because, again, the defense's argument the whole time was like, he's not really injured. This is just someone who's faking. And fortunately, the jurors sided with us on that.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who's had my own bouts of neck pain and thinking it probably was caused by something I lifted incorrectly, I can completely understand the idea of having pain, having injury, and it being detrimental. And oftentimes things like that, are appear invisible. You don't see any sort of outside impacts, but deep down it really is something painful that the person's going through. So I completely empathize with that standpoint. I'm curious if there was, anything that surprised you about, we already went through some of the prongs of, how you see this as a victory for your end and how you see the defense had some victories. Were there any aspects of that, like the fact that, you know, that 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 the decision to not find Ye liable for wrongful termination or things like that, was that at all surprising to you, or if that wasn't a surprise, anything else?
I would say, I'd say the two biggest surprises were sort of the really adversarial nature of the case. The last offer in the middle of trial was for our client Tony to pay Ye hundreds of thousands of dollars and to issue a public apology. Well, that wasn't obviously anything that we would entertain and our client would entertain in any universe. So, just in terms of uh, them accusing us of fraud when it's just an employment case that happens every day in every courtroom in this country was surprising. With respect to the jurors' deliberations, I really was surprised that they found that he made the complaint and he was terminated. And Ye testified that he didn't remember the reason for the termination. Bianca didn't know either. So there's really no alternate theory put forward. I was very surprised that the jurors found that there was the complaint, the termination, but the termination wasn't related to the complaint. And there's going to be post-trial motions. I'm sure that's something that we're going to raise as well. They didn't connect the dots, and I think even some of the folks who were covering the case, you have your traditional media and even some of the new media, even ones that I think maybe were more favorable to Ye. I think the consensus was that was surprising, that they did not find the wrongful termination. I think that was something, and that was actually a mixed verdict too. Almost, they didn't get a consensus on that. So I think they barely got to the nine that they needed, 9 out of 12, to find that. We did make three sets of claims: the termination, the injury, the wage and hour. Probably, the wage and hour. The numbers were hard to follow in terms of the money in, the money out. Some of it was cash. Unfortunately, this happened a long time ago, and when it came to both, our client NEA and Bianca, it certainly wasn't tracked very well. I think that was probably mm, one of the more confusing claims. So maybe I'm not surprised that they didn't land on the wage and hour, but I certainly was surprised on the wrongful termination.
What's your assessment of how this goes forward? I mean, is there? I admittedly haven't been keeping tabs on Milo's feed or any tabloid or entertainment press on this aspect of it. But is the defense signaling any intent to try to appeal this, or do you think that there's a bit of any signs that they're just going to sort of go forward with this and decide to sort of acquiesce, or what's your indication on those aspects right now?
No signs of a deal. I feel like it's sort of the U.S. and Iran right now in terms of where things are. Obviously, at any moment, there can be an off ramp. Of course, they're going to file post trial motion. I think one of their main arguments is that because Tony was an unlicensed worker, he can't get any wages under California law, and it's a technical issue. But if you're an unlicensed contractor doing contractor work, or an unlicensed individual doing contractor work without a license, you can't get any wages or other salary for that unlicensed work. I think they're saying because of that, he can't get any compensation at all. And we're saying, well, no, even if it applies to the wage portion, which the jurors already found that the wages were paid, it doesn't apply to the injury portion, and it doesn't apply to the termination. So I think we will see a post trial motion. We'll probably get an inevitable appeal given the way that this is going. Of course, we would cross appeal. We have the case that we now will answer, and we will file that slap motion. So slap motion in California law is whenever a lawsuit is filed that may infringe upon a free speech right. So we're going to make that motion, and if we win, we'll get our attorney fees on that as well. And regardless of how the judge rules, that ruling is also immediately appealable. So this is just the beginning, and obviously we have to file our fee and a cost motion. So we're going to be litigating for quite some time. I'm happy to do so, but also I'm happy to entertain any reasonable offer from Ye's side. I think I was before the trial, during the trial, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
the same way after the trial. And we still have another open case against Ye representing someone else. So, this is just the nature of civil litigation. Sometimes cases settle, and sometimes they don't. That's what judges, juries, and appellate courts are for.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question. I mean, we mentioned earlier the settlement that you were able to get in regards to a Donda Academy related case, but you just alluded to another open case right now involving Ye. What exactly is the matter in that one?
Yeah, so that's filed as a John Doe, but this is someone who was Ye's fixer, his investigator, and it's similar that he had really passed along some complaints, and they were really bona fide complaints, and Ye terminated him as a result. I mean, even Bianca testified that people would get fired all the time, or not all the time, but it was not uncommon. Let me be clear. It was not uncommon for people in Ye's circle to be fired. Even Milo testified in this case that he was working for Ye, and then for some reason was not working, and then came back. So, obviously, to the extent the California is at will, people can be fired, but can't be fired for complaining about some safety issue, or there's something that's what we call a protected activity. Can't do that. That firing is wrongful.
And I guess what is your, to the extent that you can speak on your client's reaction to this? What have you talked to him about the outcome? Is he expressing satisfaction? Is he ready in terms of hopefully in his case he's able to receive the payout? Is he pretty much ready to move on from this if he can?
I think so. I mean, look, as much as lawyers, we're in court, we litigate these cases. I don't think necessarily the clients love it. I don't think Ye and Bianca loved it. Obviously, we did try to resolve the case for our client, but when the offer was nothing that was even in the realm of possibility to be accepted. I do think he feels vindicated, but also relieved. They called him a liar and a fraudster and a cheat, and the jury did not find that. So certainly we asked for a lot more. Again, admittedly, we asked for well over $1 million, and we didn't get what we asked for. So, but I think the defense thought we're going to get nothing. And what we did get, plus the attorney fees, is certainly going to be something, I think, into the seven figures. And hopefully that at least, even though financially won't get our client necessarily what he asked for, hopefully he can be proud that he stood up to himself, stood up for himself, and he stood up to one of the biggest and richest celebrities in the world.
And I mean, he also wasn't the only one that was on that site too. I'm almost wondering, was there anyone else that I mean, I guess not everyone, I'm sure, was injured in the same way that he was, but have there been anyone else that came forward from that Malibu house work that wanted to see if there was any kind of dispute to open, or is it primarily just Saxon out of that?
It was just Saxon. There were other people
Mhm.
there. Oh, well, we're not representing them. There were people there
Mhm.
that were witnesses. We had two witnesses that were also there. Um, we had another sort of worker and a plumber that came and testified on Tony's behalf, but we're not representing anyone else related to the Ando house in Malibu. So all of our other cases relate to other projects or assignments or really work done for Ye.
Well, Nima, I think this pretty much wraps up most of the questions I had about this case. I don't want to keep you longer because I know you still got a full day out there in California. But I just wanted to touch base on this case and again send my congrats as a colleague and fellow sort of TV compadre. Just kind of give you your kudos for this, and hopefully we can see more of what's to come in some of the other cases that you have, and I guess. My words to Ye, do better. Do better with your your decisions. And I still have a soft spot for his music, and hoping that his new album release goes well. Seems he's trying to turn a new leaf. Hopefully he can keep to it with some of his rhetoric. And yeah, I guess we'll have to see what happens whenever Bully releases on March 27th, I think.
I think it's releasing soon. He's going to do a couple concerts here in LA. And again, I and Galen, you and I have done a lot of TV. I've talked about all sorts of different cases. I really try to be objective. I don't take things personally. I hope Ye and the defense don't either. They probably do because we filed these lawsuits. But that's what lawyers are for. We represent our clients, and he had lawyers representing him. And this one's over, and we'll move on to the next. I'm sure you and I will be on TV together talking about another case, whether it's mine or someone else's. That's just what we do.
Well, thank you so much, Nima. And please stay tuned for the next episode here on the Meme Ranch podcast. We have weekly shows coming your way, and we'll see you in the next one.
Meme Ranch. Meme Ranch.